we left off in a hurry, right? And so we're going to pick up in about chapter 13 of Numbers. We have, in Numbers, we started out with a big census, a lot of organization, right? Chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so. And by chapter 9, 10, they're getting ready to leave Mount Sinai. And by the end of chapter 10, having dedicated all the Levites to God, having understood where the various tribes are going to camp, and the various tribes are going to camp together with the Levites being around the tabernacle at all times, they get ready to head off, and they did head off, and that was in the end of chapter 10, about verse 33. Thus they set out from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey. That's chapter 10, 33. We quickly skimmed through the next little bit where basically they were complaining again, and that's a shame, and we can understand why that would be, but doesn't excuse it, and God didn't excuse it either, although he cared for them along the way. Miriam and Aaron complained about Moses, and God rebuked them and punished Miriam temporarily, scared both Aaron and Miriam terribly, and then Miriam with leprosy had to go for a certain amount of time outside the camp and then come back, and they are progressing from there, and now they are in chapter 13, they are leaving that area, and they're about 50 miles from this goal that they've had all along, which is going into the promised land. I'm not a big map guy. I'll put it up there. Joe, by the way, Greer prepared all these slides for Ben, for my use, that you've seen up here different times. There's like 1,000 of them. It's a long. But this will hopefully see, and there's one coming up that will zoom in as they travel up. But you'll see they're headed up to your far right-hand side after traveling. Now, a lot of these places that are mentioned, people don't know exactly where they were. And some of them even, they're not sure which one of them they were because they had multiple names for different reasons. But this is an approximation of the area. In chapter 13, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, verse 1, verse 2, send out for yourself men so that they may spy out on the land of Canaan, which I am going to give to the sons of Israel. And then he said, you're going to send out a man from each of the tribes. Look over with me, though, before we get going too far, in Deuteronomy 1. In Deuteronomy 1, it's a little different perspective, perhaps. Verse 19. We're going to read a few verses. Then we set out, verse 19, chapter 1, Deuteronomy. Then we set out from Horeb and went through all that great and terrible wilderness which you saw on the way to the hill country of the Amorites, just as the Lord our God had commanded us, and we came to Kadesh Barnea. And I said to you, you have come up to the hill country of the Amorites, which the Lord our God is about to give us. See, the Lord your God has placed the land before you. Go up, take possession, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has spoken to you. Do not fear or be dismayed. Verse 22. Then all of you approached me and said, let us send men before us, that they may search out the land for us and bring to us the word of the way by which we should go up and the cities which we shall enter. The thing pleased me, meaning what you just said pleased me, Moses, and I took 12 of your men, one man for each tribe. They turned and went up to the hill country and came back to the valley. Okay, so if you flip back over there to Numbers, you see that's a little bit different of a perspective. It looks like what happened was they're getting ready to go in, and Moses said, hey, we're getting ready to go into the promised land. And the people said, well, hey, would you mind if we sent out spies? Would we send some scouts ahead of us? And that idea pleased Moses. So apparently Moses took that to God, and then God said, okay, here's the instruction. Does that make sense? And I think that's a very real world thing that happens to us every day. We're supposed to be doing something. Let's see if we can do this way. It pleased those above us, and whoever the boss is at the time says, okay, do this. It works. God could have said, no. He could have said, no, you're all going. He could have said, why would you doubt me? In this case, he said, send out for yourself men that they may spy out on the land of Canaan, which I'm going to give to you. So then in verse, look at 4 through 15. They're very sort of repetitive there. From the tribe of, who is it? But I want to point out too, verse 6, Caleb is mentioned there. Caleb, we know, is mentioned a number of other times in the Bible later on. And then verse 8, if you read this through the first time, you might think, hey, they're missing somebody. They're missing Joshua. Well, in verse 8, Hoshea, the son of Nun, that's Joshua. And you can see down, let's see, verse 16, these are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. But Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. And those two, as we know the story, are the ones that had faith. There's some interesting things in the next few verses. I'm not going to make the parallel all the way through again just for time, but they have some specific instructions. And I wrote down, and I'll tell you, you don't necessarily need to go back and forth, but here's the instructions. Verse 17, go to this area. Verse 18, see what the land is like and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak. Well, in verse 28, later on, they come back, they answer that. Whether they are few or many. And again, verse 28, they answer that. How is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? In verse 27, they answer that. How are the cities in which they live? Are they like open camps or fortifications? And again, verse 28, they answer that. How is the land? Is it fat or lean? And again, later on, verse 27, are there trees in it or not? Make an effort then to get some of the fruit of the land. They did all these things. These spies went into the land at their own peril. They probably were somewhat afraid. They may have split up. There's some indication that they split up because it seemed like Caleb went one area and knew that area and some of the other ones. It would have been a lot more efficient probably if they split up and maybe walk around 12 people would be much more visible than just someone going and looking around. But they all were obedient, it seems like, and did their job. And verse 21, they went out and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehob at Labo Hamath. And I did not look up how to pronounce either one of those words, so forgive me if I did it completely wrong. And by the way, Joshua 14:9 is one of those indications. We don't have time, but about maybe they split up, but it's not absolutely mandatory that they did. In verse 22, when they had gone up into the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were. Those are three men mentioned there, right? There's three men. Now, Hebron was built 7 years before. So those three men are important. Look down at verse 33 at the end of this chapter. There also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. This Nephilim is sort of an interesting topic in the Bible. It comes up a couple of times. And in verse 33, it's clear that those three men were there, these Nephilim, they're descendants of Anak. And turn with me over to, let's see here, Joshua 14:15. Joshua 14:15. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba, for Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim. Then the land had rest from war. So this Arba, a lot of these things are named after Arba because he was the greatest of the Anakim. And you see that name Anakim being there, the descendants of Anakim. Well, he was the greatest among them. And if you look at, let's see, that was 14:15. I don't know where that went because it was verse 22, but I am not seeing. It's verse 12. I just wrote it down wrong. Verse 12, just above that at the end of Joshua 14. Now then, this is Caleb talking in the future. Now then, give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. If you heard on that day that Anakim were there, plural, right? This group of men, these giants, were there with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken. Well, I underline that fortified cities because Gath, G-A-T-H, is there. And if you look over at 1 Samuel 17:4, it says Goliath was from Gath. So I think that's sort of interesting. We have a better picture in my mind, I think, of Goliath with David and the description that was given there. He's from Gath. He's potentially from one of these fortified cities that later on, that Caleb had gone and fought against in this area of the Anakim. And way back in Genesis, there is some talk about the Nephilim, and there's two different definitions. Nephilim, by the way, and you should know. One basically is these big men. They're not giants like we think about in cartoons and TV, right? But more like Goliath. Did I say Samson earlier? I hope not. Steve, was I doing this right? Okay, yeah. So, it was Goliath. More like Goliath in our mind, where Saul and everyone out there was afraid of facing this large man. It's not talking about somebody that's 50 feet tall. It's talking about a large man. And that was one definition. Back in Genesis, when it talks about Nephilim and mighty men and these people marrying from God's people to the people that didn't follow God's people, tyrant is another good definition. These more like tyrannical men, but that has morphed in two different ways. And so these were talking about very, very large people into this area that they're going to, that they were scouting out. Verse 23, then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and from there cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two men, and some of the pomegranates and the figs. That's a lot. That's a productive land, right? Picture John and I carrying a big stick between us with a huge amount of grapes that held together. This is a productive land. We're not talking about, again, big grapes. We're talking about real grapes, regular grapes on large clusters. Then when they returned from the land, they gave an amazing report about the land. Verse 27, this is midway through, it certainly does flow with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large, and the descendants of Anak are there. And Caleb, in verse 30, tried to overcome their arguments and said, we should by all means go up and take a possession of it, for we surely will overcome it. But his voice wasn't enough. And so, chapter 14, verse 1, then all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. All the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to him, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or we would have died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? That's the same report. But grass is always greener on the other side, right? You ever have somebody tell a story? Oh, when I was a kid, it was so much better. I kind of think of that sometimes when I don't know. The Israelites, when we were in Egypt, it was so much better. I don't know. Live and grow. Keep going down the road. Take the step that's in front of you. They have God on their side. Surely they would know, but they come back to this old argument. Oh, when we were slaves, it was the best. That's very strong, a strange argument to me. Then Moses, verse 5, and Aaron fell on their faces in the presence of all the assembly of the congregation of the sons of Israel. Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, they tore their clothes. They tried to talk the congregation out of it. And in verse 8, it said, if the Lord is pleased with us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Do not rebel against the Lord. But in verse 10, all the congregation said to stone them with stones. And then the Lord steps in. Right? Hold on, I'll come over to you. Then the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the sons of Israel. And then he's angry at this. And he's rightfully so. Yes?
A lot of times today you hear people say, if I saw a miracle, I would think if I saw some sign. And I think this is just one example of many in Scripture where people see many great things and they still don't believe God. So I think it's more than just seeing something supernatural because they saw plenty of that and they still lost their.
It's good. I don't know if you can hear over there. Joe basically is making the comparison that we're often told by people that if I could just see that for myself, if I could see a miracle for myself, where's the miracle? Then I would believe. Clearly these folks had seen amazing things for years, right? They had seen amazing things in the last years, surely, and still they didn't believe. And so we know we have faith. It's not a blind faith, but faith is involved. They saw things and still didn't have faith. So let's skip down to verse 22, still chapter 14. Surely all the men who have seen my glory, this is God speaking, and my signs which I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness. You have put me to test these 10 times and have not listened to my voice, shall by no means see the land which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who spurned me to see it. He was going to destroy these people again, and Moses said, please no. And think about what all these folks would see by having 2 million people die out here in the wilderness. What would they think? And God said, okay, well, these people are not going in regardless. Except for, verse 24, my servant Caleb, because he had a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land which he entered, and his descendants shall take possession of it. And now this is kind of skipping ahead, but now the Amalekites and the Canaanites live in the valleys. Turn tomorrow and set out to the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who are grumbling against me? I have heard the complaints of the sons of Israel, and which they are making against me. I want one point from this. You think God ever say that? I wonder if God ever thinks that about me. How long, Matt? How long do I have to put up with this? How long are you going to do this? I don't know about you, but I know I fit into their category sometimes, right? My faith isn't always perfect sometimes. My actions aren't always. You wonder over a lifetime, God, does he think, Matt, how long do I have to put up with this? These 10 times? I guarantee it's more than 10 times with me. And I think that's some hyperbole there. I know some people that go back and they try to go, the 10 times. This was Mara, this is wherever they're 10 times. I don't really think that's necessarily true. But with 10 spies, well, there's more than 10 spies. But 10 of them were unfaithful. 2 of them were faithful. So people say these 10 times, maybe. Who knows? Regardless of my own life, I know it's been a lot more than 10 times that God's had to put up with me. And I'm so glad that Christ is there being my intercessor, right? My mediator. And here's Moses basically doing the same thing for these people with God. Verse 29. Your corpses will fall in this wilderness, even all of your numbered men according to your complete number, from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. Verse 32, but as for you, your corpses will fall in this wilderness. Verse 33, your sons shall be shepherds for 40 years in the wilderness, and they will suffer from your unfaithfulness until your corpses lie in the wilderness. Verse 35, toward the end, in this wilderness they shall be destroyed, and there they will die. Is it pretty clear? Pretty clear. I think that repetition and just the wording there is interesting to me. Verse 37, so everyone is that basically as a congregation said, we're going to buy into this lack of faith that these spies have, except for Joshua and Caleb. They're all going to die and not get to enter the promised land. Verse 37, even those men who brought out the very bad report of the land died by a plague before the Lord. So there were some immediate repercussions as well on at least those folks, those 10 men. But Joshua, verse 38, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, remained alive out of these men who went to spy out the land. So what happened? Well, verse 39 through, 45, basically says, we're sorry, right? We didn't do this right. They come back to Moses and said, we're ready now. We'll go in. We don't want this plague, and we don't want to sit out here for the next 40 years and not get to go to the promised land. We'll go in. And 44 says, but they went up, and they did go in, and Moses told them not to, but they went up heedlessly to the ridge of the hill country. Neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses left the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down and struck them and beat them down as far as Hormah. I forget the verse. I wrote down a few. Let's go to chapter 21, verse 3. A little bit of a comparison. Chapter 21, verse 3. This is after they've aged and died and their corpses have fallen in the wilderness, right? Now they come into this area. Chapter 29, verse 3. The Lord heard the voice of Israel and delivered up the Canaanites. Then they utterly destroyed them and their cities. Thus the name of the place was called Hormah. So you have this comparison place. One, they beat them down as far as Hormah, and then the other one, God enabled his people to destroy the Canaanites in reverse. So it's clearly the difference being God. The end of this chapter marks the beginning of this time period that we call wandering in the wilderness. Up to now, they've not been wandering in the wilderness. They went to Mount Sinai and they were traveling to the promised land. There didn't have to be a time period of wandering in the wilderness, but we have a 40-year period now beginning in chapter 15 that is wandering in the wilderness. So let's stop there for a second. Any comments, questions, anything else? Jeff?
Take at least a little hour to perceive condemnation of the Hebrews. God told them, you win and I will give it into your hand. I will give this land to you. And we're going to read in the following chapter a lot of times. All of these people that come up against us, I will give them to you. I will give them to you. Well, when he said, I will give them to you, then what did they have to do? They had to go battle. They won. Does it mean not a single Hebrew died? It's kind of interesting that we're not given any numbers or any kind of thing like that, but I think it's pretty sure that when they went in battle, people were going to die.
Yeah, perhaps.
And nobody, I'm just so
Right.
today, nobody wants to go into that kind of battle.
Nobody wants to go in that kind of battle.
There's 10 of us here and 5 of us are not coming back.
Right.
And I want them,
Oh, I agree. I do think we ought to be a little cautious in that once proven a number of times over and over. There were some times that it says nobody died, right? I don't know that that's all the time. You're absolutely right. And clearly if they're going into battle with God, it's on their side. But we surely some were, it could be dangerous also.
Things where God has given us that there's often, and if you do this, I will give you that.
Yeah.
And I think even here, we still, if you still got to go to battle. And going to battle
Yep.
is usually not,
It's not safe.
no.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, sir.
I think this is a great reason why the study that we're having over the next couple of years, where it brings the whole Bible together. It really shows that God is not different from then as he is today. He had patience with them. He had love and mercy for them, and they still kept turning their back on him.
Yeah.
And finally, time ran out. It's like no more. Same thing today as we live. He's showing mercy to us in this very minute. The love and mercy, the grace he's given to us. But there's going to be a time it's going to run out, and we can't change it.
Yeah, good point. Thank you for that. And just a reminder that the Old Testament is given to us for learning, right? While everything that was given to them on Mount Sinai doesn't exactly apply directly to us, meaning these laws that were given, these sacrifices that were given, that doesn't apply. But God is God. God of then, God of Abraham, God of Moses, God of, in the New Testament, our God, same God, right? All the same. So his attributes are going to be the same. And when he says something, he means it. The difference in our lives and in their lives was this constant physical presence where we have Christ kind of standing in between that. But if we think that something's important to God, we need to act on it because God is the same as he was then. Exactly right.
And the thing we learned is to get the reward, we will have to fight, and we will suffer.
Yeah, good. I like that.
It's an example here in the Old Testament. They suffered.
Chapter 16. We're skipping chapter 15 because we already covered sacrifices and some of these instructions with Ben. Chapter 16. Let's see here. I think I've got a map up here. So they're going up that way, up towards Jericho, and then they're going to have to branch off and now wandering in the wilderness. I don't know how much time has taken place here, okay? We're getting ready to talk about the rebellion of Korah and Dathan and Abiram. And in the next chapter, we talk about the rod of Aaron budding. You all know that. But I don't know if it's been 15 years at this point, if it's been 20 years, if it's been 38 years. There is some indication that when we get to the next chapter, we're only a year or two from actually coming into the promised land. So here we have a period of time. It's interesting to me. I only mention it because we had one chapter, chapter 15, which is just about the laws and the offerings, right? There's no story of the people here in that chapter 15 and what they did and what they decided and mistakes they made and gathering up of food. None of that takes place. And I've mentioned a couple of times about how many chapters, how many books took place while they're on Mount Sinai, right? 1 year, they got everything they needed to know about God and about the the laws that they were to follow and all the sacrifices. And now some odd 40 years is getting ready to pass in about 2 chapters. Okay, maybe 38 years in about 2 chapters, one of which was just talking about sacrifices. And then this one. And again, I don't know exactly which year this was, but Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, this is verse 1, with Dathan and Abiram. So you've got 3 guys, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, O-N. Okay, that's a name. It's not talking about on top of. O-N is a name. The son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took action. Okay, so you've got 4 guys. Do you know all 4 of them? We really only talk about 3 of them. Somehow or another during this time, just keep in your mind that it seems like On or On, O-N, he peeled off. He basically said, you know what? You're right, I'm wrong, I'm not going to be associated with these guys anymore. And that's something that was a little bit new to me because I've studied this so many times that I didn't really even think about. Even at this point, any of these men could have changed their mind because we see the one seems to have and does not show up in the punishments or anything else that comes after this. These men, they rose up before Moses in verse 2, together with some of the sons of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown. They assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, we're tired of this. We're not going to listen to you anymore. You've taken us into this mess. We don't think you have the authority and we don't want to follow you. You've gone far enough, it says. Hold on. And Moses said to them, you have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? And Moses heard this, and he fell. I am transposing this verse, and I apologize. I'm sorry, I apologize. These men said this to Moses and Aaron, okay? And they're saying, why do you exalt yourselves over the assembly of the Lord? And when Moses heard this, he fell on his face and spoke to them, saying, tomorrow the Lord is going to show you who is holy. He's going to bring him near to himself. Even the one whom he will choose, he will bring near to himself. And then he gives them a task to do with these censers, to bring them the next day, and we're going to have a result from this. And again, for the interest of time, turn over to verse 16-ish. Let's see here. Verse 16, Moses said to Korah, you and all your company be present before the Lord tomorrow, both you and they along with Aaron. Each of you take your fire pan, put incense in it, and each of you bring a censer before the Lord. 250 fire pans. Also you and Aaron shall each bring a fire pan. So they each took his own censer and put fire in it. Verse 18, they stood at the doorway of the tent of meeting with Moses and Aaron. Thus Korah assembled all the congregation against them at the doorway of the tent of meeting. Verse 19, and the glory of the Lord appeared to all the congregation. Then the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them instantly. Who? All of these 250 people, plus whoever is following these 250 people, I'm going to consume them instantly. But again, Moses and Aaron fell down on their faces and said, O God, God, the spirit of flesh, when one man sins, will you be angry with the entire congregation? So then Moses said, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the congregation, tell them to get away from these dwellings of who? These 3 people, Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And so Moses went down there, and in verse 26 he says, depart now from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing that belongs to them, or you will be swept away in all their sin. So they got back from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the doorway of their tents, along with their wives and their sons and their little ones. There's an interesting phraseology that will change. They all 3 came out, and 2 of them came out with their families. Korah was from a different tribe. I think that's interesting, right? These 2 were from one tribe. Korah evidently had moved his tent, but his family must have stayed with the rest of the family, because they're mentioned later on in the Bible. I think it's down maybe Numbers 26. In Numbers 26, I think that they're mentioned. Let's look instead of me guessing. Number 26, verse 10 and 11. That way if I'm wrong, I'll at least know I'm wrong. Let's see. So in the company of Korah, when they contended against the Lord, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up along with Korah, when that company died, when the fire devoured 250 men, so that they became a warning. The sons of Korah, however, did not die. All right, so his family isn't there, but the rest of their families and everyone is there. And so then in verse 28, it says, by this you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these things, for this is not my doing. If these men die the death of all men, or if they suffer the fate of all men, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord brings about an entirely new thing, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that is theirs, and they descend alive into Sheol, then you will understand that these men have spurned the Lord. And as he finished speaking all these words, the ground that was under them split open, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up and their households and all the men who belonged to Korah with their possessions. You talk about seeing something miraculous and horrifying, terrifying. I imagine this fits the bill. That Moses says, okay, this is from me, and nothing happens. Or really, if they just die by something you've seen before, then don't believe anything else I say. It's not from God. But if the ground opens up and swallows them alive, then you know it's from God. Is that something that, if they had all died of poison, we might go, oh, this is pre-planning somehow. But I can't imagine seeing something like this, the earth just opening up after someone says it's getting ready to do that. So verse 33, so they and all that belonged to them went down alive to Sheol, and the earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly, and all Israel who were around them fled at their outcry. I bet they did, for they said, the earth may swallow us up. Fire also came forth from the Lord and consumed the 250 men who were offering the incense. Right? So they did not escape either. Verse 41. On the next day, all the congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, saying, you are the ones who have caused the death of the Lord's people. So after seeing this, they sleep on it. They're still bitter. They wake up the next day and say, Moses, this is all because of you. It's because of you. You didn't speak for us. I don't know what they're thinking. And it came about, however, in verse 42, when the congregation had assembled, that they turned toward the tent of meeting, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And verse 45, God says, get away from among this congregation, that I may consume them instantly. God has, I didn't write down the different place. God has said that a few times, right? He has said, Moses, step aside. I am going to kill all of these people. I am done with this. And Moses again spoke, but look what happened. Okay, so the plague this time actually starts coming out. The plague starts killing all these people. And Moses, verse 48, took a stand between the dead and the living, so the plague was checked. But those who died in the plague were 14,700, besides those who died, the 250 families that died on account of Korah. So was God serious about this? I think because of some of this and because of the next story, when I say I don't know if it was year 20 or year 38, I don't think this was year 38. Okay? I think the next story might have been closer to year 38. This was, to me, probably fairly early on in these wanderings because, like a lot of things, like a story that we're not going to really spend much time on, when a man is found working on the Sabbath and God says stone him, yes, the law was there, but they didn't stone every single person that ever got found working on the Sabbath, and yet they made an example of him. In the New Testament, we think about lying to Peter and bringing the saying, "Oh, we sold all the property," and they're killed. I think points are made sometimes early on, and so I suspect I don't know of another point, like a place in the Bible where God makes His will so puts an exclamation point on His will quite so drastically. Does that make sense? Where He kills some odd 15,000 people with a plague and says, you better start listening. The next chapter is similar in a way, but it's much kinder, you might say. I'm going to come to you, Joe. Hold on one second. The people are complaining, and the Lord says to Moses, get a rod, each of you, all 12 rods from your leaders of your households, and Aaron's going to do the same thing. And they put all these rods together, and Aaron's blooms. Aaron's rod sprouts with fruit and leaves, not just buds, right? It produces overnight, where the other ones that they carved their initials in their names, however that was. To me, I see such a drastic difference. Do this or die. Don't forget. Do this because I am your creator, and I am the one that breathes life, and I am the one that leads you. And so to me, I feel like they probably were separated by some amount of time, but I don't know how much. Joe.
I agree with you as earlier because toward the end, over the years, most of the old people from Egypt were dying, the ones that were always disobedient. So I doubt it was the last few years because most of them were very old.
Yeah, great. That makes a lot of sense. I agree. Chapter 20. I spent too much time, and I apologize. Hope Ben will be able to go through chapter 20 and 21. Has to do with Miriam dies, and she gets about that much time. Chapter 20, verse 1. The sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. Now Miriam died there and was buried there. And how many times have we studied about Miriam? And she dies here. Then the people are, again, complaining. Moses, to me, this is part of it, doesn't say it specifically, has just lost his sister who basically saved his life and brought him to her mom and raised him in some way and has been with him all this time. And the people are complaining, and God says, okay, take your rod and your brother Aaron, verse 8, assemble a congregation and speak to the rock before their eyes, it may yield its water. You shall thus bring forth water for them out of the rock, and let the congregation and their beasts drink. Verse 12, verse 10. Moses says, listen now, you rebels, shall we bring forth water for you out of this rock? Then Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and water came forth abundantly, and the congregation and their beasts drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you have not believed me to treat me as holy in the sight of the sons of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land which I have given them. So that's chapter 20. They pass through Edom. Aaron dies shortly thereafter, and it says because of this same sin, they didn't treat God as holy. Who's usually conducting that rod? I've wondered sometimes if that wasn't Aaron maybe that could have struck it. They were sort of referred to the same person a lot of time. Regardless, they together stood before the congregation of people and didn't treat God as holy, didn't follow what they said. Was it a massive punishment? I don't know. Moses was 120 years old or so by this point, getting there. And often had said, this is too much, this is a lot of work. Time of transition is needed anyway, but clearly it was a punishment for not having that faith in God, for not treating God holy. We got 30 seconds. Does somebody want to add something to any of this? Yeah, Jack.
On that point, I think of the body of Moses we learn, I forget where it is, where it was taken and hidden so that the angel of Satan, or whoever it was, might not come and find it and cause controversy. So
Yeah.
to that degree, Moses is still held the body of God in some great perspective and honor.
Yeah, either 2 Peter or Jude, one of those talks about contriving, arguing over the body of Moses, and I can see why God would hide the body of Moses, because the people would be revering it like they did some other things along the way, and but God hid it from them, and it talks about an angel doing that. You might look it up if you haven't done it lately. That's it. Thank you all. Appreciate your patience these last couple of weeks.